Mail order bride arrives beaten and broken. The vampire king says, "You're coming with me." Rain poured from the heavens like silver knives, slashing against the crooked roofs of the small village nestled in the shadow of the mountains. The streets were empty, save for the occasional dog huddled under a cart and the restless wind that carried the scent of damp earth and old stone. At the edge of the village, a lone figure stumbled along the muddy path, her skirts torn and soaked, her hair plastered to her face. Ilara could barely lift her head. Her arms were bruised, her ankles raw from the journey that had been promised as a path to a new life, but had become a nightmare she could barely remember. Her family had sent her as a bride to a distant land, and the man who awaited her was said to be a king of darkness, a being of power no mortal could withstand. Every step she took felt heavier than the last. Her mind swirled with fear and sorrow. What if he rejected her? What if the stories of his cruelty were true? And yet, a faint glimmer of hope refused to die, perhaps, here at the end of her suffering, a life worth living awaited. A rumble of hooves broke her thoughts. In the midst of the storm, a carriage appeared, drawn by black horses whose eyes gleamed like coals. The wheels splashed through the mud, and the lanterns cast long, trembling shadows across the path. The carriage stopped before her, and the door swung open with a quiet, deliberate motion. From the shadowed doorway, a figure stepped down. Valen, the vampire king, moved with the grace of a predator and the authority of a ruler who had known centuries of power. His coat, dark as midnight, clung to his tall frame, and his eyes, pale, luminous, and impossibly deep, studied her with a piercing intensity. "You're coming with me," he said, his voice calm but unyielding. It carried no threat, yet it brooked no refusal. Ilara's heart raced. She wanted to run, to hide in the darkness, but her legs trembled and faltered. The storm seemed to pause around them as if the world itself held its breath. Finally, she whispered, I don't even know your name." "Valen," he replied, eyes never leaving hers. "And yours is Ilara. Step forward." Something in his tone, neither cruel nor kind, made her obey. She felt as if invisible threads tugged her toward him, pulling her across the mud-streaked ground until she stood at the threshold of the carriage. The interior was warm, scented faintly with lavender and old wood. Candlelight flickered across carved panels that bore symbols she did not recognize. Valen offered her a seat, and she sank into it, shivering. For the first time in days she felt safe, yet the weight of the unknown pressed upon her chest like a stone. He climbed in beside her, silent for several moments. Rain tapped against the roof of the carriage in relentless rhythm. "You are bruised," he finally observed. "Not just on your skin, but here." He placed a finger lightly over her temple. "Your spirit carries wounds I can see even from here." Ilara flinched at the contact. Why would you care?" she asked, her voice small, almost lost in the storm. "Because I am the one who brought you here," Valen said simply, "and because I do not suffer broken things lightly, not in my presence, not if I can help it." The words struck her like lightning. She had never known anyone to look at her like that, not her family, not her so-called friends. He was not offering pity. He was offering acknowledgement, and in that recognition, a strange warmth began to bloom amidst the cold fear. The carriage rolled forward, taking her away from the village, the storm, and the life she had known. The world outside became a blur of black trees and silver lightning. Every turn of the wheels carried her further into the unknown, and yet she felt an odd sense of inevitability. She had arrived at the place she was meant to be, though she did not yet understand why. Hours passed in silence. Occasionally, Valen's gaze would meet hers, and each time she felt a pull she could neither resist nor explain. The moon finally broke through the clouds, casting a pale glow across the landscape. Shadows stretched long across the forest, and the air grew colder. Where are we going?" she asked, finally breaking the silence. "To my castle," he said. "A place of power, of history, and for now of refuge. You need rest. You need safety. You need time to heal." The words were simple, but something in their cadence hinted at centuries of knowledge and experience. Alara felt herself trembling, not from cold, but from the weight of realization. She had been broken and abandoned, and yet here was a man who spoke of healing, of refuge. Could she allow herself to trust him? The carriage came to a stop at the gates of an enormous castle perched atop a cliff. Its towers clawed at the sky, and lightning illuminated its jagged silhouette against the stormy clouds. The walls seemed alive, shadows moving across their surfaces as if the stones themselves breathed. Valen opened the door, and the wind whipped past them, carrying the scent of wet stone and the faint tang of blood. He extended his hand to her. "Will you trust me, Alara?" he asked. She hesitated. Every instinct told her to run, but the exhaustion in her bones and the sincerity in his eyes compelled her forward. She took his hand, and the warmth of his touch spread through her like sunlight through frost. Inside, the castle was both beautiful and forbidding. Long corridors stretched into darkness, lit by chandeliers that swayed in the draught. Tapestries depicted battles, kings, and creatures she could barely comprehend. The air was heavy with the scent of history, magic, and secrets. Valen led her to a room filled with soft silks and blankets. The hearth glowed warmly, casting flickering shadows on the walls. "Rest here," he said. "You have traveled far. You have suffered. And now you are safe, for tonight at least." Alara sank onto the bed, the warmth seeping into her chilled bones. She wanted to speak, to ask 100 questions about this man, this castle, this strange, frightening world she had entered, but exhaustion stole her voice. Valen lingered at the door, silent, as if guarding her against the darkness that pressed at the edges of the room. Finally, he nodded once and retreated into the shadows, leaving her alone. Yet the solitude did not bring comfort. Her mind raced, replaying the journey, the storm, the carriage, and the piercing gaze that had seen into her soul. She realized she was not just a broken bride brought to a king. She was the first person in years to encounter Valen without fear or awe, and somehow, that terrified her more than the storm ever could. Sleep eventually claimed her, but even in dreams, shadows moved and whispered her name. A presence lingered, watching, waiting, yet not entirely malevolent. She felt in the deepest part of herself that her life had changed in a single, irrevocable moment. When she awoke, the castle was bathed in the gray light of dawn. The storm had passed, leaving mist that curled around the towers like fingers of smoke. Valen was not in the room, but a note lay upon the bedside table, written in flowing, elegant script. "The world outside is cruel, but you are no longer alone. Come to the balcony. There is something you must see." Alara's heart quickened. She rose, pulling a robe around her shoulders, and walked cautiously to the balcony. The air was cold, sharp, and scented with rain and pine. Below, the valley stretched endlessly, shrouded in fog. And there, at the edge of the forest, she saw figures moving, shadows that were not entirely human, shapes that seemed drawn from nightmare and legend. Her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to flee, to scream, but something inside her held her in place. The feeling of being watched, of being on the brink of discovery, stirred a mixture of fear and exhilaration she had never known. Footsteps sounded behind her. Valen stepped onto the balcony, his cloak whipping around him like a dark wave. His gaze swept the valley, and then, slowly, it turned to her. There was a storm in his eyes that mirrored the one outside the castle walls, a storm both beautiful and terrifying. "Those shadows will not harm you yet," he said softly, "but they are drawn to this place, to you. You have power, Alara, though you do not yet know it, and soon you will understand why you were sent here." Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. Her life had been filled with suffering, betrayal, and fear. But here, on this balcony, with the storm-swept valley below and the mysterious king beside her, she felt the first flicker of something new. Possibility, strength, and a strange, terrifying hope. Valen's gaze held her unwavering. "Tonight you are safe. Tomorrow your journey truly begins." Lightning split the sky, illuminating his face in stark relief. Alara could see centuries of sorrow, fury, and longing in his expression. And deep inside, she knew, without a doubt, that her life had been changed forever. She took a deep breath, gripping the balcony rail, and looked into the valley where the shadows waited. Somewhere in the dark, something ancient and powerful had noticed her presence. And she realized, with a mixture of fear and fascination, that the true story, the story of her life, of Valen, of the castle, and of the shadows, was only beginning. And in that moment she understood that there would be no turning back. Cliffhanger. The wind carried a whisper from the valley below, a voice ancient and cruel. She belongs to the night, and the king will pay the price for taking her. The first rays of dawn filtered through the tall windows of the castle, scattering light across walls carved from black stone and halls shrouded in shadow. The storm had passed, leaving behind a damp chill and the faint scent of pine and wet earth. Alara shivered, pulling the robe tighter around her. She had spent the night in restless sleep, haunted by the shadows she had seen from the balcony and by the strange, penetrating gaze of Valen, the vampire king. When she opened the door to her room, Valen was already waiting. His presence filled the hallway like a moving shadow, tall and commanding, his cloak trailing behind him. He offered no words at first, only a silent nod for her to follow. The corridors twisted and turned like the inside of some ancient labyrinth. The castle felt alive. Whispers seemed to cling to the stone walls, faint murmurs that made her skin prickle. Every tapestry and portrait hinted at battles and tragedies long past, yet Alara sensed that the history of this place was far from finished. "This castle," she began hesitantly, "it feels alive." Valen's lips curved into the barest hint of a smile. "It is," he said. "Every stone, every shadow, every whisper is bound to the blood and magic of my ancestors. This place remembers, and it watches, especially tonight." Alara felt a shiver run through her. He did not mean the storm nor the valley below. He meant the castle itself and perhaps something beyond it. He led her to the dining hall, vast and imposing, with a ceiling so high that the chandeliers seemed to float. The tables were long and polished, but only 2 chairs were set. Candles flickered in the draught, casting moving shadows that danced like spirits. "You must eat," Valen said, motioning to a plate of bread, fruit, and warm tea. "Your body is weak. You cannot heal on empty stomachs." Alara hesitated. She had not eaten for nearly a day. The food smelled comforting, almost human, yet she was wary. "And you do not eat?" she asked softly, curiosity overcoming caution. Valen paused, his pale eyes meeting hers. "I do not eat as you do," he said. "I feed on necessity, not hunger, and I do not take what does not belong to me. You will see, in time, much about this world will be different than you expect." Alara nodded, unsure what to say. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. Rather, it seemed charged, heavy with meaning. When she took a bite of bread, she realized how long it had been since she had felt safe enough to eat. After the meal, Valen led her to the main hall of the castle, a room so vast that her voice echoed against the vaulted ceiling. He gestured to a balcony overlooking the inner courtyard. Mist clung to the ground below, swirling like living spirits. Figures moved in the shadows, wolves, crows, and shapes that did not belong to this world. "Those who come seeking me rarely survive the night," Valen said quietly. "The creatures beyond these walls are drawn to fear, to weakness. But you," he paused, his gaze sharpening, "you carry something they will notice, something they cannot resist." Alara swallowed, unease prickling at the back of her neck. "What do you mean?" "You are stronger than you realize," he said. "And that is both your blessing and your danger." Before she could ask more, a low howl echoed from the courtyard, followed by a movement in the shadows. Alara's heart raced as Valen's hand brushed against hers, steady and commanding, yet gentle. She felt a pulse of warmth at the touch, as if he were grounding her in a storm of uncertainty. "The shadows test us first," he explained. "They are drawn to weakness, but you will see, even darkness can be faced with courage." Suddenly, a figure leapt from the darkness of the courtyard. Its form was twisted, neither fully human nor fully animal, eyes glowing with a feral hunger. Ilara stumbled backward, terror rising. Valen moved in a blur, faster than her eyes could follow. He extended a hand, and a beam of crimson light shot forth, striking the creature and forcing it back. It snarled, retreating into the mist. Ilara's breath came in shallow gasps. What was that?" "A shadow creature," Valen said, voice low and steady. "Born of old curses and forgotten magic. They are drawn to fear, to weakness, and to power they do not understand. You saw them because you carry strength, and because they sense you belong here in this castle, in this life." Her fear mingled with awe. "And you can control them." "I do not control," he corrected. "I confront, I command, I protect. You will learn the difference in time." The moment hung heavy between them, charged with tension. Ilara realized she had never seen anyone so fierce, so commanding, yet so careful with life. And yet, something deeper lingered in his gaze, something older than fear or anger, perhaps sorrow, perhaps longing. They moved through the castle together, and Ilara began to see the layers of its life. Portraits of kings and queens, heroes and tyrants, stared down at her from the walls. Each room whispered secrets, some dark, some sorrowful, all compelling. The air thrummed with magic, a pulse that made her hair rise and her heart race. Valen led her to a smaller chamber, lined with books and scrolls. "This is where I study," he said. "Here is where I keep the histories of my family, the knowledge of this land, and the magic that binds it. You will need to understand all of it if you are to survive, and if you are to help me." Ilara approached the shelves cautiously. Ancient tomes, bound in leather and etched with strange symbols, towered above her. She touched one gently, feeling a spark of energy run through her fingers. "You sense it," Valen observed. "The magic in these walls, in the air, in you. Few can feel it. Fewer still can endure it." A sudden crash echoed through the castle. Candles flickered violently. Ilara spun around, heart racing. From the hall outside, the shadows moved again, creeping along the floor like living ink. Valen's expression darkened. He stepped forward, his cloak billowing, and extended his hand. A barrier of light shimmered, holding the shadows at bay. "They test us," he said. "Every night they will try, and every night you must choose to face them or to hide." Ilara's courage wavered. She wanted to flee, to hide beneath blankets and pretend she was still a frightened girl. But when she saw the determination in his eyes, the unwavering presence of his power, she realized that running was not an option. I will try," she whispered, her voice trembling. "That is all I ask," he said, and for the first time his gaze softened, just a fraction, enough for her to see the centuries of loneliness behind it. They spent the day exploring the castle. Valen showed her the armory, where weapons of every kind rested in careful rows. The library, where she ran her fingers over ancient manuscripts and maps of lands long lost. And the gardens, overgrown yet enchanting, where magical herbs grew in clusters, their leaves glinting with dew and faint energy. At each step, Ilara felt herself growing stronger, more aware, more alive. Fear still lingered, but alongside it was fascination, curiosity, determination, and an odd sense of belonging. As night fell, the castle changed. Shadows stretched long and moved with intention. The wind howled through the towers, carrying whispers that seemed almost human. Ilara felt the same pull she had in the carriage, an invisible thread tying her to this place, to Valen, and to something greater than herself. Valen returned her to her chamber. "Rest now," he said. "Tomorrow you will see the true challenges of this castle, and of me." Ilara watched him leave, his figure disappearing into darkness. She sat by the window, looking out at the courtyard where the shadows lingered, aware of eyes upon her, waiting. Despite the fear, a strange exhilaration filled her chest. She was no longer merely a broken bride. She was a part of something vast, something powerful, something dangerous, and perhaps something beautiful. She did not know if she would survive the night. But deep inside, a spark of defiance flickered. She would face whatever came, not as a frightened girl, but as someone who had already endured far too much to turn away. Cliffhanger. The moon hung low in the sky, pale and watchful, casting a silver glow across the mist that clung to the gardens and battlements. Inside the castle, the halls seemed quieter than usual, as if holding their breath for what was about to unfold. Alara sat by her window, her hands folded in her lap, staring out at the fog-shrouded valley. She had spent weeks in the castle now, learning its rhythms, its dangers, and its secrets. The shadows that had haunted her arrival were no less present, but she had begun to understand them, to see the patterns in their movements, to recognize their whispers. And most unexpectedly, she had begun to understand Valen. He was no longer merely a figure of terrifying authority. She had glimpsed his moments of solitude, when he moved through the halls without a trace of his usual command, when his eyes lingered on some memory he would not speak of. She had begun to see him not as a king of darkness, but as a man burdened by centuries of sorrow, by the weight of a curse that none but he could endure. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the corridor. Valen appeared, his cloak sweeping behind him, his pale eyes catching the candlelight. For a moment he said nothing, simply watching her. "You are restless," he observed, his voice soft, almost gentle. I can't sleep," Alara admitted. "The shadows, they are always moving." "Always waiting," Valen nodded, his expression unreadable. "They are drawn to what is strong. They sense courage, even when it is hidden beneath fear. You have grown stronger, Alara, but there is more you must learn." She looked at him, her curiosity mingled with unease. What is the truth about this castle? About you? Why do the shadows come?" He studied her for a long moment, as if weighing the decision to reveal what he had always kept hidden. Finally, he spoke. "This castle stands on the boundary between the world of the living and the world of the cursed. The shadows are remnants of old magic, creatures born from anger, grief, and broken promises. They test all who enter. And I am bound by a curse that ties me to this place. I cannot leave, not without risking everything I have and everything I care for." Alara's heart tightened. "A curse," she whispered. "Why, what happened to you?" Valen looked away toward the window, where the moonlight caught his pale skin and silver eyes. "Centuries ago, I made a choice that saved my kingdom but bound me to these walls. I live, but only here. I protect, but only from here. And I cannot allow anyone else to suffer as I have suffered." The weight of his words pressed down on her chest. She had thought herself broken, yet she realized that even her suffering was small compared to the centuries of isolation, responsibility, and pain he carried. For the first time, she felt both fear and compassion, a strange, trembling connection to this being of power and sorrow. I wish I could help," she said softly. "You already have," he replied. His gaze found hers, steady and unwavering. "Your courage, your presence, it awakens things I thought lost. Strength, hope, even the possibility of redemption." Alara felt heat rise in her cheeks. She did not understand how she could move from fear to fascination so quickly, yet the pull between them was undeniable. She wanted to ask him more, about the curse, about the shadows, about the man beneath the king. But before she could speak, a sound shattered the moment. A low growl echoed through the halls. Shadows shifted along the walls, gathering like smoke in the corners of the room. Ilara's pulse quickened. She had grown accustomed to their presence, but they had never come so close, so deliberately. Valen moved in front of her, his stance protective, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "They sense you," he said, voice steady. "They are testing not just your courage, but your heart." The shadows surged, swirling into forms that resembled twisted wolves with glowing eyes. Ilara's first instinct was to flee, but she remembered his words. Courage hidden beneath fear was the most powerful kind. She planted her feet firmly on the floor, summoning every ounce of resolve she could muster. "Stay behind me," Valen commanded. "And watch." He extended his hands, and a pale, shimmering light spread across the room. The shadows recoiled, hissing and twisting, but did not vanish. Valen's voice rose, a chant of old power that vibrated through the stones of the castle. Alara felt a warmth in her chest, a pulse that matched his rhythm. It was as if the castle itself was alive, responding to their unity. Then a thought struck her. If these creatures were drawn to courage, could she face them, even without his magic? She stepped forward cautiously, raising her hands. "Go back," she shouted, her voice stronger than she expected. The shadows faltered, recoiling as if struck by an invisible force. Valen's eyes widened in surprise and something else, approval, perhaps pride. "You are stronger than I imagined," he said. Alara's heart pounded, and for a moment the fear lifted, replaced by exhilaration. She had faced the shadows and she had not run. She had felt the strength inside her, dormant but alive. The creatures retreated into the darkness, vanishing like smoke into the corners of the hall. Alara turned to Valen, her chest heaving. "You did well," he said, his tone softer now, almost reverent. "Most would have fled. You stood your ground. That is rare." She smiled faintly, a mix of relief and pride. I felt something. I don't know what it was, but it felt right." Valen's eyes softened. "It was your courage, your heart. And it is why you are here, why you survived the journey that broke so many others. You are meant for more than you realize, Alara. And so am I." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Alara did not know what to say. She felt drawn to him, to the mystery, the danger, the beauty of his presence. And yet fear still lingered, a reminder of the shadows outside, the curse he carried, and the unknown that awaited her. The night deepened, and Valen led her to the balcony once more. Below, the valley stretched endlessly, mist curling around the trees, shadows moving like restless spirits. He placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, steadying her against the cold. "They will come again," he said quietly, "and next time you may have to face them without me. That is part of your journey. You must learn to trust yourself, even when fear commands you to flee." Alara nodded, understanding more than she expected. The castle, the shadows, Valen himself, they were all tests. And she was beginning to see that strength came not from magic or weapons, but from courage, heart, and the willingness to face what terrified her. For hours they stood in silence, watching the valley below. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying secrets she could almost understand. And in that silence, a connection deepened between them, a bond forged not in words, but in shared understanding, shared fear, and the quiet acknowledgement of loneliness that neither had spoken aloud. Suddenly, a sound shattered the stillness, a scream, faint but unmistakable, echoing from the outer walls. Alara's heart leapt into her throat. Valen's gaze hardened, and he moved to the edge of the balcony, peering into the darkness. "They have found something or someone," he muttered, "and it is not by accident." Alara felt a thrill of fear and anticipation. She wanted to run, to hide, but she knew she could not. Not now, not after what she had faced. "We must go," Valen said, extending his hand to her once more. "Stay close, trust me." She took his hand, feeling the familiar warmth, the silent promise of protection. Together they moved through the castle, down winding staircases and across halls that seemed to shift and breathe with their every step. Shadows danced along the walls, whispering and watching, yet they did not interfere. At the castle gates, they found a small group of shadow creatures gathered around a figure, a young apprentice from the castle, terrified but unharmed. The shadows hissed and recoiled as Valen stepped forward, and with a wave of his hand they dispersed into the night. The apprentice collapsed to the ground, trembling. Alara rushed forward, helping him to his feet. "Are you all right?" she asked. I think so," he stammered. "They came from nowhere. I didn't know what to do." Valen's gaze was sharp, almost predatory as he looked at the creature's fading forms. "They test us," he said, always, and they will not stop until they are satisfied or until they are defeated. Alara looked at him, admiration and something deeper stirring in her chest. This man, this king of shadows and curses, had saved lives with a strength she could barely comprehend. And yet, he had also shown her a glimpse of what courage, heart, and determination could accomplish. That night as they returned to the castle, Alara felt a shift within herself. Fear was no longer her master. It had become a teacher, a companion, a reminder of what she was capable of. And her heart, broken and battered though it had been, felt the faint stirrings of something unexpected: hope. Cliffhanger. The shadows that lingered along its walls seemed more restless than ever, moving with intent, as though the very stones whispered of the battle to come. Alara stood in the main hall, her hands clenched at her sides, every sense alert. She had faced fear before, but tonight felt different. Tonight, it was not only courage that would be tested, it was her heart, her trust, and her bond with Vaelen. Vaelen appeared from the darkness, his cloak sweeping behind him like a shadow itself. His eyes, pale and piercing, softened only for a moment as they met hers. "Are you ready?" he asked. His voice carried the weight of centuries, but also the subtle tremor of concern, the rare vulnerability he rarely allowed anyone to see. "I am," Alara said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I've learned much, I can face them now." He inclined his head, silently acknowledging her growth. Then he turned, and together they moved toward the castle gates. Beyond lay the courtyard, shrouded in mist. Shapes shifted in the fog, figures half human, half shadow, all drawn toward the power that pulsed in the castle, and in Alara herself. The shadows surged, moving faster than thought. Their glowing eyes bore into her, sensing fear, yet finding none. Vaelan's hands glowed faintly with crimson light, a shield against the advancing creatures. "Stay close," he warned, stepping forward to meet the onslaught. Alara felt her pulse quicken. For the first time, she did not wait in fear. She raised her hands, feeling the courage within her bloom, a strange energy she had not known she possessed. "Go back," she shouted, her voice carrying over the mist. The shadows faltered, twisting in confusion. Vaelan's eyes widened in surprise and pride. "Yes," he murmured. "That is it, trust in your heart. Your courage shapes the world here." Together they fought, not with weapons, but with presence, with will, and with the rare bond that had grown between them. Each step they took, each command they gave, pushed the shadows back. The mist rolled and curled, but it could not withstand the combined strength of heart and centuries-old power. As the last shadow dissolved into the fog, a deeper presence made itself known. A shape emerged at the far end of the courtyard, a dark, towering figure radiating ancient power. Its eyes gleamed like molten silver, and the air around it hummed with menace. Alara's stomach twisted in fear, yet she did not falter. "This is the source," Vaelen said quietly, standing protectively before her. "The one who cursed me, the one who threatens this castle. Together we must face it." Alara nodded, feeling the bond between them stronger than ever. "Together," she repeated, a promise to herself and to him. The dark figure advanced, its power radiating like a storm. Vaelen extended his hands, light radiating to meet the darkness, but he faltered slightly. The curse that bound him to the castle weakened his strength outside its walls. Alara saw it, and without hesitation she stepped forward. "You will not win," she said, her voice carrying more power than she knew she possessed. The energy she had felt in the shadows earlier now surged through her. She raised her hands, and light, warm and brilliant, shot forth, mingling with Vaelan's own magic. The dark figure recoiled, hissing, struck by the combination of human courage and vampire power. Vaelan's eyes widened in awe. You are more than I imagined," he said, his voice trembling with pride and relief. Together they pressed forward. The figure lashed out, but each strike met the combined force of their will. Alara felt fear and determination merge, the memory of her broken past, of betrayal and suffering, fueling her strength. This was not just a battle for survival, it was a battle for freedom, for life, and for the bond they had forged. Finally, with a blinding flash of light, the dark figure screamed and dissolved into mist, leaving only silence and the faint echo of ancient power retreating. The courtyard lay empty, the mist curling like smoke in the moonlight, and the castle seemed to breathe again, alive and calm for the first time in centuries. Alara sank to her knees, exhausted but triumphant. Valen knelt beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You have done what few could ever imagine," he said softly. "You have freed me and perhaps even yourself." She looked up at him, her chest heaving, eyes shining. I never thought I could be strong," she whispered. "But I am." "You were always strong," he said. "You just needed to see it for yourself. And you gave me strength too, Alara, something I thought I had lost centuries ago. You reminded me that even in darkness, light can grow." The two of them rose, standing together in the courtyard. The castle, once a place of shadows and curse, now felt like home, not just for Valen but for her as well. She realized that the castle, the shadows, the trials, they had all been tests, preparing them for this moment. They walked through the halls, their hands brushing, their hearts beating in quiet synchrony. The castle seemed to hum around them, alive with gratitude and new life. Alara felt something she had never known, a sense of belonging, of purpose, of peace. In the library, Valen stopped and turned to her. "You have changed everything," he said, his voice low, intimate. "The curse is broken. The shadows no longer hold sway, and we are free to live together as we choose." Alara's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow but of relief and joy. "I never thought I would find this," she said softly. "Not in the castle, not with you, but I have." He reached for her hand, holding it firmly. "And I have found something I thought lost forever. Trust, hope, and perhaps love." For a long moment they simply stood, letting the silence of the castle surround them. The storms had passed, the shadows had retreated, and the night was calm, bathed in silver moonlight. Yet even in this moment of peace, a quiet sense of vigilance lingered. The world beyond the castle was vast, mysterious, and unpredictable. But Alara knew now that she was not broken, and Valen knew he was not alone. Together, they could face whatever came next. That night in the tower chamber, they looked out over the valley. Mist still curled around the trees, but the shadows had no power here. The castle, their home, stood tall and unyielding against the night. Alara rested her head against Valen's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. "Will it always be this way?" she asked, a touch of worry still lingering. "Nothing is ever certain," he said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. "But this is a beginning. We have faced the shadows, broken the curse, and found each other. That is more than most can hope for." She smiled, a real, unguarded smile, and for the first time in her life she felt safe. Not because the castle protected her, or the magic, or even Valen's power, but because she had found strength within herself, and a bond that could withstand anything. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of rain, the distant cry of a night bird, and the rustle of the trees. Somewhere in the valley, life continued, mysterious and alive, and within the castle a new chapter had begun. Alara stood looking out at the moonlit valley, hand in Valen's. "Together?" she asked. "Together," he said. And in that simple word a promise passed between them, a promise of courage, of love, and of life, bound not by chains, but by choice, trust, and hope. As dawn began to break, painting the mist with pink and gold, they stepped out onto the balcony. The castle seemed to glow with renewed energy, its walls no longer shadows, but witnesses to their triumph. And though the world beyond the castle still held mysteries and dangers, for the first time, Alara and Valen faced it not as isolated souls, but as partners, as equals, as those who had survived the darkest night and emerged stronger together.